Let's get this guide started by breaking down the parts of the CVGS News graphics package, and how they'll fit together in this edit. To help keep things organized, I've labeled them A through E, which lines up with the order you'll likely be adding them to your project. Graphic A is an intro animation with a bit of music and voiceover. The transition includes a transparent portion, so the clip can be placed directly over your footage without the need for some other transition. Graphic B includes a little icon known as a channel bug, as well as a plain box that will serve as the background for the news ticker. Graphic C is the frame for the news ticker, and it's between C and B that you'll place your text graphic with the additional headlines. Graphic D is a lower third animation. It slides up as if from behind the ticker, then extends outward to provide a space for your reporter and interviewees' names, as well as your news story title graphics. Graphic E is a concluding animation, effectively the reverse of Graphic A. Now, between your footage, replacement backgrounds, and graphics, you're going to need more than the 3 video tracks that come in a default sequence. If I right-click over here to the right of the track visibility icons, I'll see an option called Add Tracks. I'm going to need at least 8 video tracks in total, so I'll enter 5 for the amount of additional video tracks and hit OK. I won't have nearly as much audio to work with, so I'm going to resize my timeline a bit by dragging that thicker gray line between the video and audio tracks and pulling it down to give the video tracks a bit more room. The first clip I'm going to add to the timeline is the replacement background for my reporter, which I'll drop into video track 1. I'm not really interested in the audio component of this clip, so in the source panel I'm going to click and drag from that film stock icon so I just bring in the video. Now this clip is of a higher resolution than what I've set my sequence for, so Premiere will ask me if I want to change the sequence settings to match the clip. I'm going to say no to that. Next, I'll add my first reporter clip. As usual, I've already gone through and added some markers to my footage, and as you'll see from this first reporter clip, I've got a marker at the point where I start talking as well as a second beforehand, like I did for the digital name tag. I'm going to be laying Graphic A over this in a little bit, and the transition out of that begins at the 7-second mark and lasts for another second. So I want to have at least a second of footage that I can place under that transition. I'll set my in and out points and bring my reporter to the 7-second mark of video track 2. Just so you can see that transition, I'll go ahead and take Graphic A and place it at the beginning of video track 8. Now to do some background replacement. I'm going to go into the effects panel and search for Ultra Key. Then I'll click and drag the effect onto my reporter clip. Remember, if you have trouble finding any of the panels I mention, you can go up to the menu bar, select Window, and choose the panel from the list. With my reporter clip selected, I'll go to Effect Controls and scroll down until I find the Ultra Key controls, and more specifically, the control titled Key Color. Next to it are a small box and an eyedropper icon. Clicking the box will pull up a color picker from which I can choose a color to remove from the clip. Rather than eyeballing it from this chart though, I want to use the eyedropper to select from a specific point within the frame itself. Ultra Key will attempt to remove the selected color as well as some adjacent hues, but don't be surprised if it doesn't pull all of the green. You might just need to try selecting a few different spots for the best results, or as I'll show you in a moment, you can use some of the options listed below to tidy it up. The first thing I'm going to do is go above key color to where it says output, and I'm going to switch it from composite to alpha channel. The program panel preview will then switch to a black and white image, which shows me what parts of the frame are opaque, transparent, or translucent. The closer an area is to pure white, the higher the opacity. The closer to pure black, the lower the opacity. Or another way that you can think about it, white is what stays revealed, black is what gets concealed. So I'm going to go below key color now and open the section titled Matte Generation, where I'll find options including highlights, shadows, tolerance, and pedestal. Your filming conditions will determine how much each of these will need to be adjusted, so you'll need to experiment a bit to find the values that leave a nice clean cutout. Having made some adjustments now, I could switch the output back to composite and see that my replacement background is now more clearly visible behind my reporter. There's obviously still some elements to the sides that I'm going to need to hide, so I'm going to go and switch back to alpha channel. To get rid of these lingering sections on either side here, I'm going to want to create a mask. A mask is a shape that determines which parts of a frame are visible, or what parts of a frame an effect is applied to. The Ultra Key controls have their own masking tools, but those only affect what portion of the frame the Ultra Key effect is applied to. I instead want to scroll up and use the controls under the opacity section. For my purposes, I'm going to select the rectangular mask, and now click and drag the corners to create a perimeter around my reporter. I can afford to have that perimeter be fairly close to my subject, because while recording the reporter, I didn't really move around all that much. If you've got a little bit more movement, you need to make sure that the mask accounts for that. Now, since my mask doesn't feature any of those other lingering white patches, I can switch the Ultra Key output back to composite and we can see how this looks. Now, if the green screen wasn't lit terribly evenly when you were filming, you might have to go in and apply the Ultra Key effect a couple of times, depending on how much variation in the green you're trying to remove. So with the first background replacement done, I'm going to go and grab Graphic B and drop it into Video Track 3 and line it up with the start of my reporter clip. I'm then going to do the same with Graphic C, putting it in Video Track 5. Remember that we're going to have an animated text graphic running in Video Track 4, so we want to make sure it's visible over top of Graphic B, but under Graphic C. I'm going to go ahead and create the text graphic and place it in Video Track 4. I won't be able to work out the animation properly until I have more of the video built out, so I'll save the rest of the headlines for then. I'll add some placeholder text for now, and use the Effect Controls panel to adjust the text position such that it's in line with the other ticker graphics and the first letter of the first word is up against the left side of the ticker window. For the text itself, the font I'm using is Tahoma Regular, 30 point, left justified, all caps, and white text. That should keep things legible. Remember that text controls can be found both in the Effect Controls panel as well as Essential Graphics. The latter can be called up by double-clicking a text graphic in the timeline, or by going up to Window and selecting it from the list. Next, I'm going to take Graphic D and place it in Video Track 6, lining it up with everything else below Graphic A. Now, if you remember, I've got those markers on my reporter clip indicating both the point where I start talking and a second before. I wanted the second before for the sake of Graphic A, and I'll base the start of Graphic D off of the point where I actually start talking. The idea being that the Graphic D animation will kick in as soon as the Graphic A animation is done. Now, you'll notice that Graphic D is only 6 seconds long. How then might I extend it to last as long as I need? I could go in and slice it just after the animation ends and copy and paste the remaining clip over and over and over again, or I could find a point just after the animation ends, right-click on the clip, and select Add Frame Hold. A frame hold takes the current frame and changes it to function like an image file, meaning I can stretch it to be as long as I want, well past its original 6-second duration. You'll notice that I already placed a marker on that clip, so I knew where to add that frame hold. For reference, it's a little over a second into the clip. Now, with my lower third ready, I'll create another text graphic over top of it and place it in Video Track 7. This is where I'll be typing the name of my reporter. For the top line, I'm going to use Franklin Gothic Heavy, 50 point, left justified, all caps, black text. For the second line, I'm going to use Franklin Gothic Book, 40 point, everything else though being the same. I'll then use the Effect Controls panel to line this text up to my liking. Now, I want to add cross dissolves to either end of this text. So I could go into the Effects tab like I've done previously and drag and drop some cross dissolves, or with the text highlighted like this, I can just hit Ctrl D, which will apply the default transition to both ends. Now, it's not an issue right here because it's alone in the track right now, but if I was to undo that and say bring something else up next to one side of it, we'll put these side by side, and I was to do that again, it would only apply the transition to one end of it, the end that doesn't have anything next to it. That's because Premiere won't know by default how exactly you want to position a transition between two adjacent clips. Now, I'm going to need text graphics like this for the story headline as well as the name of the interviewee, which we'll see in a moment. But rather than creating them from scratch every time, I'm just going to duplicate the one I just made using the Alt-click and drag method I showed off way back in the first assignment. I'll come back to those later and edit the text as needed. Now, rather than elaborate on every little edit I make in this section, I'm going to highlight a few key points. So after my first reporter clip comes my B-roll. The reporter keeps talking, but I only need the audio component of that. So, I can either click and drag from the waveform icon in the source panel to drag audio only, or when it's in the timeline, I could right-click on the clip, select Unlink, and then delete the video portion. In place of the video component of the reporter, I'm going to use that drone footage from Pexels, and then over top of that, I'm going to place that antique-looking image and keyframe it to slowly grow while the reporter is talking. After the B-roll comes my interview subject. I'm going to repeat the Ultra Key process I described earlier for the reporter, and if you were paying attention, you would have noticed that the image I used for their background was flipped in the sample video. I did that because if you look at the image, the light is clearly stronger on the left side of my interview subject's face, and I wanted the background to reflect that, as if that brighter light was a result of the window in the image. So to flip that image, I just went into the effects panel, searched flip, and applied the effect titled horizontal flip. After that, I cut back to the reporter, and rather than going through the Ultra Key process again, I can just copy the first reporter clip and paste attributes on this last clip. Afterwards, I can go back and arrange the lower third text graphics properly. Reporter 1, story headline, interview subject, and reporter 2. And then I can grab graphic E and drop it in video track 8 right as the reporter finishes signing out. Alright, nearly done. All that's left is animating that news ticker, which I can do now that I know the actual duration of the video. I'll go back and switch to the type tool, double-click my placeholder text, and then copy and paste my additional headlines, which I have saved in a separate document off-screen. Currently, my text extends past the right side of the ticker, so I'll need to do some masking. With this ticker text graphic still selected, I'll go to the Effect Controls tab, and in the Video section, not the Graphics section, the Video section, I'll select the rectangle icon under Opacity. Now, the frame of the ticker is a bit small in the overall frame of the video, so I'm actually going to magnify my preview a bit by opening the drop-down to the bottom left of the preview and selecting a higher percentage. Now you'll notice that there's these dotted lines around the solid line of the mask itself. And if I adjust the mask's position so that it overlaps with the text, you'll see that it kind of fades the text out at the edges. This is referred to as feathering. You'll notice that under the mask controls, there's a setting titled Mask Feather. It's currently set to 10, I'm just going to drop it down to 0. Now the reason I chose to have the non-text portions of this ticker be two separate graphics was specifically to make it easier to place this mask. Since Graphic C already is going to obscure part of the text, I can use it as a guideline for where the mask actually goes. Now to animate the text, you might be inclined to use the position controls directly above opacity. If I fiddle with those a bit, you'll quickly see a problem with that, and that's that the mask moves with the text. To animate the text alone, I'll need to go into the graphics section up at the top above the video controls. Under vector motion is another set of position controls that don't affect the mask. so it'll be these that I use to animate the text. I've already got it at the correct starting position, so I'll drop a keyframe and drag it to the start of the mini timeline. Then I'll zoom back out and I'll slide the X value until the end of the text is just past the right side of the ticker frame. I can then drag that keyframe to the end of the mini timeline and I'll have my final animation. That's a pretty dense timeline, so let's review what all's in it and where. In audio track 1, I've got the audio component of the intro animation, the newsroom music, and the "we now go live" bit. Up until this point you probably didn't see it, and that's because by adding the graphic to video track 8, the audio was automatically placed in audio track 8, so I just adjusted my timeline, found the audio, and brought it back up. In audio track 2, I've placed all my audio of my reporter and interview subject clips. In video track 1, I've got my replacement backgrounds and my bit of drone footage, which itself is a sort of background. In video track 2, I've got the video component of my reporter and interview subject clips, all of which have been ultra keyed and masked, except for the second bit of the reporter where I only needed the audio. In video track 3, I've got graphic B, the news ticker base, and the channel bug. In video track 4, I've got the text graphic with all my additional headlines, masked and animated. In video track 5, I've got graphic C, the frame of the news ticker. In video track 6, I've got graphic D, the lower third animation that's been frozen with a frame hold to stay on screen for the rest of the video. In video track 7, I've got my lower third text graphics featuring the reporter's name twice, the story headline and subtitle, and the name of the interview subject, as well as their title. And in video track 8, I've got graphics A and E, the intro and outro animations. All told, just a shade more complicated than the digital name tag. Let's give it one more watch with the timeline visible.
We go now to our special correspondent for the story.
Thanks, Charlie. An old mansion on a lonely hill, a nightly source of shrieks and howls, and a hallmark of Whaling, Virginia, has fallen silent after more than a century. Lady Bloodhurst, also known as the Woman in the Black Veil, has been a source of fascination and civic pride for the people of Whaling since her first sightings in the early 1900s. Well, you know, some folks wouldn't much care to be neighbors with a spirit like Lady Bloodhurst, but generations of Whaling citizens have found peace in her screams. They were a sort of nightly reminder that no matter how tough things may seem, at least our souls aren't bound to an ugly old house. Mayor Phillips also confirmed the formation of a task force for the purpose of finding a new ghost or ghosts to occupy Bloodhurst Manor. Volunteers are being asked to stop by the task force's shady downtown office in the darkest hour of the night to see how they can help fill this tragic void. Reporting from Whaling, Virginia, this is Skip Hiflington, CVGS News. And that should do it for this final editing guide. Remember to review your work before exporting, make sure everything's where it's supposed to be, and that you don't have any stray clips sitting further down the timeline, possibly left over from earlier in the editing process. Remember to grab a screenshot of your completed project's timeline, and don't forget about that last quiz. And with that, that's a wrap on the Video Production Lab guides. The past handful of weeks have thrown a lot of information your way and required you to learn a fair few new skills, so congrats on making it to the end. I hope you've made some work you're proud of, and hopefully what you've learned will prove useful for you down the road. I know it has for me.